2019 was quite the year for cinema. So many films were able to capture the hearts and minds of general audiences and cinephiles alike. However, there seemed to be one movie in particular that was able to unite both the normies and pretentious pricks.
I'm sorry, if you won Best Foreign Film, you should automatically be invalid to even be qualified to win Best Picture.
Together, in beautiful harmony. Parasite is a movie that highlighted issues of class discrimination and social inequality, while still being entertaining enough for general audiences. And yet, in spite of both of those achievements, two of its most noteworthy accomplishments were its sweeping success at the 2019 Oscars and its outstanding box office performance. Yet, for a fully subtitled movie dealing with the wealth disparity inherent under capitalism, made by a director who is far from a household name, to gain this amount of praise and notice in the States was, and still is, unheard of. So then it almost begs the question. If Parasite was so successful, then why did the entirety of its domestic box office run still make less than the opening weekend of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie? And I know what you're thinking. But how can that be? I love Spirited Away. All my homies love Spirited Away. How can there be no money? Shut up! Well, you know, that's a great question. With plenty of different answers. And I think we can start off by talking about the internet's favorite pastime, gatekeeping. I want to preface this by saying that gatekeeping is not a new concept in regards to America's takeover of the global film market. In an article from foreignpolicy.com titled How Hollywood Conquered the World All Over Again, writer Stephen Galloway details how Hollywood has destroyed the foreign film market not only from within its own borders, but across the rest of the world as well. Which we will be getting back to, don't you worry. Also, anything that I talk about in this video will be linked in the description below, so go read through the sources there and any other valid source instead of just taking my words at face value, you know?
Pardon me for interrupting.
Let's start with a simple question. When was the last time you saw a subtitled movie being advertised before some good old Sunday night football? Now recall back to a time where you saw a film not in the English language advertised during your weekly viewing of The Big Bang Theory. Consider just for a moment if your late night viewing of the North American Scrabble Championships was ever so rudely interrupted by a production of the non-native variety. That's right, you can't. And do you know why that is? Well, for one, nobody watches Scrabble tournaments.
But do yourselves a favor if you want more of this kind of high-quality commentated action.
What I'm trying to say is that a lack of advertising is a surefire way to curb any movie from reaching a wider audience, and especially if it's coming outside of the United States. Investors are going to be more cautious when they invest into something if it has a lower safety net of success. I mean, it only makes sense considering major US companies will spend millions in advertising each year on nearly all of their films, while generally speaking, foreign filmmakers just don't have access to those kinds of funds when making their movies, let alone while promoting them. Over time, Hollywood has built itself up to a place where they can easily spend hundreds of millions of dollars routinely on their films, while if we look at a country like China, for instance, which has begun to establish a real market for itself without the help of Hollywood, with recent projections showing that its box office could surpass $22 billion by the end of 2025. The Wandering Earth and Ne Zha were both major players in China's 2019 success, even finding a home on Netflix, and yet they both had budgets of less than $100 million. It may be routine to spend that kind of money domestically speaking, but it's an absolute rarity for studios outside of the US to spend anywhere near $100 million Renos at any point, let alone on a routine basis. Now there are exceptions, like with Ang Lee's Crouching Tiger grossing over $128 million domestically. It even gave Ang Lee an Oscar win in the Best Foreign Film category. While Lee's success story shows what can happen when larger studios support the vision of foreign filmmakers, it's also one that very few can share. As said by Paul de Garabedian, former president of box office analysis company Exhibitor Relations, for every Crouching Tiger, there are hundreds of foreign films that don't make any money here. In order to make films palatable to an American audience, they have to be in English. That's why you see American versions of films like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The Scandinavian version was perfectly good, but nobody saw it in the US. Now I think it's time to address the elephant in the room.
Who you think you are? Fucks like, do you know who I am? Fucks fail to understand, I'm like,
in order to answer how Hollywood was able to land in such a prosperous position and stay on that path since its inception, none of which may have been possible without D.W. Griffith, who in 1910 was sent down to California to film a number of films, including the first movie shot in Hollywood. After hearing about Griffith's success, it led to many filmmakers fleeing to the West Coast, also in an effort to avoid the massive fees imposed by the patents owned by Thomas Edison. California gave filmmakers a place with ideal weather and cheap land to create films independent of Edison's control. Around 1917 enters Adolf Zukor, the man who led Paramount Pictures to success through the 1910s and 20s. After leaving his partners behind, Zukor took control over Paramount and revolutionized the film industry, buying out many movie studios, taking over his own distribution, and most importantly, Zukor had control of over 200 theater chains. Now, while America was laying the groundwork, Europe's market had already been showing steady progress. According to one study, throughout the early 1900s, European cinema was performing very well. At times they held 60% of the US market. However, that all came to an end approaching the 1920s. And that same cascading effect came to French cinema, where before World War I, 70% of films sold internationally were French films, but due to the war, these industries lost most of their resources to support the war effort. On top of that, in 1918, Europe was ravaged by the Spanish flu pandemic, which had been circulating through the European armies for months before the 1918 pandemic was even known worldwide. The war, combined with the pandemic, stopped all of the progress Europe had been making in the film industry. In the US, however, no combat had taken place on its soil, and its infrastructure had only grown stronger. All of this built up a safety net for studios like Paramount to take over the international market, and after more than 100 years since Europe's initial rise, they've never been able to recapture that spot or anything close to its sense. And to those wondering about the state of Asian cinema during this time, unfortunately these countries did not have the access to American distribution like Europe did, causing these industries to slowly grow in isolation. However, it's worth noting that preceding the 1920s, Japan began to have an influx in leftist filmmaking. Established under the Proletarian League of Japan, they used 16 and 9mm film to shoot documentaries showing the conditions of workers at the time. Inevitably, however, it was forced to disband through excessive censorship and frequent arrest by the Japanese government. Even more devastating, many of these films have been lost due to the 1923 earthquake, the bombing of Tokyo, and just the natural effects of time. But as Eastern Asia developed through the 20s and 40s, it led to unique styles and subgenres forming, like Japan's Jidaigeki or Hong Kong's action-filled cinema. Both would play heavily into each other's popularity on the global stage, with Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai being the catalyst that brought Japan to a wider audience throughout the 1950s, while the rise and death of Bruce Lee saw China's entertaining dose of action films surge to popularity, which was further popularized by Jackie Chan, who brought this newfound flavor of comedy and dangerous stunt work to his action films.
What the hell is that?
What does it mean when there's a picture of a skull?
Oh, good stuff.
At the same time, India had one of the most influential trilogies released to the world. Satyajit Ray's Apu trilogy may be recognized among movie snobs, but it's largely unknown to the general public, despite directors like Akira Kurosawa, Wes Anderson, Martin Scorsese, and Steven Spielberg all acknowledging how influential his movies were on them and filmmaking as a whole. But once again, a lack of exposure has kept this amazing director from gaining the mainstream attention that he truly deserved. Lastly, we can take a look at South Korea, who had suffered from strict censorship laws up until the late 80s. Luckily, in recent years, South Korean cinema has garnered a lot of attention and praise, which may not have occurred as quickly as it did without Park Chan-wook's Old Boy.
Endless trash!
Now before we start, I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that every remake of a foreign film is bad or shouldn't have been made. There are obvious exceptions to this, some of which even improve on the original film. If a director wants to take the original movie and change it to suit their artistic endeavors and examine the original with a new and creative lens, then in my estimation that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. However, what I don't find acceptable are these Hollywood cash grabs that lack an ounce of creativity or passion for the original movie. Spike Lee's Old Boy, for example, only exists to Americanize a foreign movie that had an ounce of Western popularity.
We keep the same plot points to a degree, but the whole movie is made from an American point of view.
As it provided nearly the exact same story, but without everything that made the original movie so twisted and memorable. Where the original was layered in subtle details and has some of the most powerful performances ever put to film.
그때처럼 보라색인데. 안 돼! 미도야 안돼 절대 열지 마 절대 열지 마. 그 열면 큰일 난다. 손도 대지 마 알았지?
Spike Lee misses the mark so badly it's laughable at points.
You called her a whore.
You called her a whore. Whore.
Sexy, very sexy. Huh, Chucky? Oh, what a fucking freak.
Father.
Plot points on a page can only be as good as the care and detail a given director and crew is willing to give it. And personally, I don't think director Spike Lee had an ounce of care while shooting this. The movie is so transparent in its lack of care for the original, you could easily confuse it for a parody of itself. Oldboy may be one of the most notable examples of a horrid Hollywood remake, but it doesn't get much better the more you look. Time after time, these movies are rightfully panned by critics and audiences, and while that may seem very good on face value, it's not as if these bad reviews make anyone seek out the original movies any more than they would otherwise. Instead, these remakes will make their money back, and Hollywood will wait for another piece of foreign cinema to gain popularity so it can make more money than the original ever did. Not to mention, these remakes will gain some cultural significance just for how poorly made they are.
No, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah!
That's a lot of fish.
So while it seems everyone agrees that the movie is not good, thanks to memes and our ignorance of the original, those bad remakes will have made a bigger societal impact than the originals ever will. Being a regular Joe Smo moviegoer must be tough. Outside of the monthly theater cycle, you're blind to any and all movies. I mean, just think about this. Have you ever been chatting with a friend or family member, maybe one who enjoys movies but also doesn't actively seek them out? They just see what's in theaters. And then at some point they utter the phrase, "Why aren't there any good movies anymore?" To any cinephile, that would sound ridiculous, but just by looking at the 20 highest grossing films of the decade, it's either nostalgia-driven remakes or sequels. Many of which are being produced by one company in particular, or one mouse, I guess you could say. Disney takes up 50% of the entire list, so if you don't like a Marvel or Disney movie, you're gonna be in trouble. Which is why it's so important to expand your taste and search out films that suit your preferences. The internet is your best friend for that. When it comes to discovering the wealth of great movies that exist outside of the United States, streaming services like Netflix do a decent job at providing movies you wouldn't have checked out before, while phone apps like Letterboxd provide a fun way to lay out your tastes in movies while discovering other people's tastes. I know I for one would not have found some of my favorite movies without services like these. Hey! With all that being said, let's all get ready to take a big breath of hopium, because it's time to get that foreign film breadcrumb trail started with some recommendations.
Stop!
If you watch subbed anime but also you hate reading text, go jump off and glue in a video game, and otherwise there are dubs if you hate reading that much but you'd be a degenerate plebeian if you watch live action dubbed over sub. I've put this list together in a way that will provide a variety of selections. Some will serve as a great entry point into foreign cinema, while others offer something a bit more challenging.
Yeah, my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Let's start with something exciting. If you're a fan of balls-to-the-wall action, then there's no better place to look than the Indonesian film Raid Redemption. And if you're tired of seeing films that spend the first half hour wasting your time trying to set up a plot that won't go anywhere and you don't even care because you paid to see the action, then this is the film for you. The Raid Redemption also shows how when you cut out the filler, it makes the action a lot more tense, as early on you will meet characters that you expect to be around for a while but are killed off in the first action scene, setting your expectations such that anyone could die at any time. Choreography is astounding, and the directing is tight and steady, as opposed to Hollywood's fetish for quick cutting every second someone throws a punch.
Yeah, my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Moving on, we have Train to Busan, a 2016 zombie thriller directed by Yong Sang-ho. We get the story of a work-addicted father who is trapped on the train to Busan when a viral infection breaks out, causing our lead and sidecast to fight for their survival. A very basic setup, but one that sets itself apart from your typical zombie flick by how they cleverly set up the relationship between the father and daughter, the dynamic between our sidecast, and an exciting set of action scenes. But fundamentally, this one is able to pull your emotions in by actually developing their relationship instead of using the kid as a plot device for tension. So yeah, this one over World War Z every time, any day.
You know, my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
2012's The Hunt is a terrifying look into the kind of hell that false pedophile allegations bring into someone's life. Danish director Thomas Vinterberg crafted a piece of film that is just as believable as it is disheartening. This is one of those movies where it takes a niche situation and explores every facet of it. It paints a very honest picture of how easily confusion and mass hysteria go hand in hand, with some incredible performances by Mads Mikkelsen and Annika Wetterkopp, who was only 8 years old when this was filmed, but still gives a more convincing performance than any adult actor from the DCU.
My brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Next, let's go with the Japanese art house classic House, which is, well, you see, it's a horror movie that is one of the most hilarious yet bonkers movies to ever exist. Its humor is abstract and is more akin to a modern YouTube shitpost than anything else. Not to mention its dynamically rich soundtrack and immaculate set design, all of which working behind one of Japan's most experimental directors. There's a lot to love here if you can get behind it.
You know, my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
For this next one, I don't want to say too much, as I have plans to elaborate on this movie at a later date, but what I will say is that it features progressive views on masculinity and femininity, a killer soundtrack, jaw-dropping action, and some of the most expressive and colorful animations I've ever seen. And it achieves this by striking a perfect balance between having enough intensity and drama in order for you to buy into its narrative of societal oppression, without losing sight of its colorful and fun aesthetic. Animation fans don't have any excuse to not watch this one.
You know, my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
I Saw the Devil is another violent, emotional story of revenge that stars Choi Min-sik. What a coincidence. But where Oldboy took the path of action and drama to tell its story, I Saw the Devil takes up the mantle of thriller and horror in order to show the story of retired police chief Kim Soo-hyun tracking down his daughter's killer, displaying what monstrous ends that good intentions can lead to. If you add on top of that an excellent score and clever camera work, then you've got yourself a horror movie from the early 2010s that's actually worth revisiting.
You know, my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Incendie is a film you may not recognize by title, but its creator might just ring a bell. French-Canadian director Denis Villeneuve brought a harrowing story of love, hope, and the tragedy of war. Framed as a slow-burn drama, the story of twins on a journey to discover their family's past is gripping from start to end, with top-notch performances, purposeful camera work, and a disturbing twist. Incendie is a mysteriously powerful experience that is intensely shocking yet so cathartic in its end. If you're a fan of Denis' previous movies, then I cannot stress enough how important it is that you see this one.
You know, my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Amelie, a 2001 French-German romantic comedy, is strange to put it best. It's a simple story about a woman who finds her purpose is to bring unexpected joy to whoever she can, but its frantic editing and offbeat main characters set it apart from your typical rom-com in the best way possible. It has a very hopeful and quirky spirit about it that is pure magic to watch. Let's put it this way, it's the closest a movie can get to giving you a nice warm hug.
You know, my brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Embrace of the Serpent will transport you on a spiritual journey into the friendship between a shaman and two scientists. Inspired by the journals of the first explorers of the Colombian Amazon, it acts as a showcase of the Amazonian people. Embrace of the Serpent is slow and meticulous, but in exchange you feel as if you've been given a newfound perspective into these cultures and the history behind them. With an atmosphere that swallows this movie in its ethereal quality, I cannot recommend this enough.
My brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Shin Godzilla is a soft reboot of sorts for the character, placing him in a contemporary setting with allegories to the ineptitude of bureaucracy and the lack of organization a government has when it comes to fixing a problem they created. Godzilla is depicted as a force of nature, oppressive and ever adaptive, as opposed to his more heroic interpretations. The scaling and design imposes that tension on you, in a way that hasn't been done since the 1954 film. While some of the acting does leave a bit to be desired, if you're already a Godzilla fan or a sci-fi fan in general, then Shin Godzilla is very much worth checking out.
My brain is still in recovery mode from taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Finally, we'll end this video with Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is the most recent selection, being from 2019, and it's gorgeous. Set near the end of the 18th century, a young painter is sent to paint a woman before her wedding day, and what ensues is one of the most unique and compelling romantic dramas that I have seen in a very long time. The movie is breathtakingly beautiful in its cinematography and shot composition, as well as its very subtle performances. Yet what sets this movie apart is the slow-burning connection that is formed through very little words here in this movie. Taking advantage of the visual aspect of film, it fully envelops you in the colorful yet serene quality of its environment by taking its time and allowing you to feel every bit of emotion between these two characters, a lot of which is conveyed through facial expressions and its dedication to slowly peeling back each character's curtains. It's such a rewarding experience that will give you new interpretations each time you watch it. I mean, it's made me cry on multiple watches, and I'm sure it will when I decide to watch it again.
Ça fait des années que je rêve de faire ça. Mourir? Courir.
Before we conclude this video, let's address the question in my attention-grabbing thumbnail. Does America have a foreign film problem? Yes, obviously. I mean, that's kind of why I made the entire video to begin with. However, it is worth noting that America didn't do anything wrong by taking advantage of the film industry after it was left in shambles post-World War II. It would have been idiotic to not seize that opportunity when presented to them. However, the US has been the global dominant power as far as the film industry is concerned since that First World War, and unless the general populace starts to demand an increase in international movies to be shown in more theaters, then this whole foreign film problem is not going to be solved anytime in the future. If people continue to vote with their wallets by not seeing foreign movies in theaters, then corporations like Warner Brothers or Sony Pictures Classics will not find the incentive to distribute those movies on a wider level. So show them what you want to see. Do what you can to support these filmmakers by watching, sharing, and supporting their movies. Because at the end of the day, filmmaking at its core is a labor of love, no matter where in the world it comes from.